In 1951, students at McGill University found what sounded like the easiest job on campus: lie on a comfortable bed and earn $20 a day. Most expected to sleep, think, or catch up on schoolwork. Within days, some were watching figures, and animals move through scenes that did not exist. Nothing had entered the room. The room had simply stopped giving their minds anything new. The volunteers were healthy male college students. $20 was more than twice what many of them could normally earn in a day, and there was no assignment to finish. They could eat, use the toilet, and leave whenever they wanted. The researchers only asked them to stay as long as they could. Then, the equipment went on. Translucent goggles covered the eyes. They admitted soft light, but erased edges, objects, and faces. Cotton gloves covered the hands. Cardboard cylinders ran from below the elbows to beyond the fingertips, letting the arms bend while making touch dull and repetitive. The student rested his head inside a thick U-shaped foam pillow. The cubicle walls muffled the building, while an air conditioner and a steady hum buried whatever sounds remained. The room was not dark. It was not silent. The students were not frozen in place. That distinction matters. The experiment did not remove sensation. It removed variation. Light still reached the eyes, but it carried almost no pattern. Sound still reached the ears, but it barely changed. The body still touched the bed, gloves, and cuffs, hour after hour. This was the unchanging room. The main published study followed 22 students, usually for 2 or 3 days. The cubicle itself was only about 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 6 feet high. Food and bathroom breaks interrupted the setup for a few hours each day. Otherwise, the same pale light, the same soft pressure, and the same low hum continued around the clock. At first, many students did exactly what they had planned. They slept. Then they woke up, and the time became harder to fill. They tried to review coursework or solve problems in their heads. Their thoughts wandered. Some sang. Some talked to themselves. Some tapped the cardboard cuffs together just to make something happen. The researchers had expected boredom. They had not expected how quickly boredom would become a problem of thinking. What happens when the mind has work to do, but the world stops changing around it? Before the experiment, the students completed tests involving number patterns, word making, block designs, symbols, and spatial judgment. They took more tests during and after the cubicle. Compared with control subjects, the isolated students performed worse on several tasks. They struggled to hold a train of thought. Problems that had been manageable became irritating. A small failure could produce an outsized emotional reaction. The result was not a clean collapse of intelligence. Some tests changed, and others did not. Some students were affected far more than others. Later laboratories would not reproduce every finding, but the pattern inside McGill was consistent enough to disturb the researchers. Sustained, organized thought was becoming difficult under conditions that looked physically comfortable. The students became restless. Early good moods gave way to irritability. A few described periods in which they could not think of anything at all. After leaving the cubicle, some appeared dazed. For a minute or two, objects looked flat or fuzzy, and colors appeared unusually intense. Headaches, nausea, fatigue, and confusion sometimes lasted longer. Then came the part that changed the experiment. The first volunteers had not been systematically asked about unusual imagery. They made scattered comments about dreams continuing after they woke. One researcher entered the cubicle himself and experienced it. After that, the team began asking the final 14 students to report what appeared in their visual field. The reports formed a ladder. At the bottom were changes in brightness, followed by dots, lines, and simple geometric shapes. All 14 reported imagery at this level. 11 described repeating patterns. like wallpaper moving across an empty field. 7 saw isolated objects or figures. 3 reached the top of the ladder and described complete scenes. One student saw a line of small figures. Another watched animals cross a snowy landscape. Prehistoric creatures moved through a jungle. The images could tilt, invert, or arrive in a sequence the viewer did not choose. What began as interesting eventually became irritating. Some students complained that the pictures would not let them sleep. These were not all the same experience, and they were not a diagnosis of psychosis. Most were simple visual phenomena. Only a few became elaborate scenes, but they were vivid enough that healthy students reached for the language of dreaming while awake. There was another clue. When a student concentrated on a demanding test, the imagery often disappeared. When the outside world provided a structured problem, the strange internal pictures lost ground. When the task ended and the uniform field returned, they could come back. Why would taking information away make the mind produce more experience, not less? Donald Hebb, the psychologist who directed the program, thought the common picture of the brain was wrong. A brain was not a machine that could sit idle and instantly wake when a signal arrived. Normal thought seemed to require a continuing flow of varied input. Sensation did more than tell the brain what was outside. It also helped keep the system alert, organized, and ready to use that information. Modern neuroscience uses different language, and there is still no single proven explanation for every report from McGill. One useful model treats perception as a negotiation. Incoming evidence constrains what you see and hear, while memory, expectation, and ongoing brain activity help interpret it. Normally, the world keeps correcting the brain. Edges move, voices change, touch shifts, predictions that do not fit are replaced. Inside the cubicle, that correction became weak and repetitive. The goggles did not send darkness. They sent featureless light. The pillow did not create silence. It helped turn sound into a steady wash. With less changing evidence to settle what was out there, internally generated patterns may have carried more weight. That does not mean the brain deliberately invents entertainment when it gets bored. It means ordinary perception is already active. The same system that finds a face in a crowd, completes a shape behind an obstruction, and keeps the room stable while your eyes move is always making its best estimate from incomplete information. The McGill room made the incompleteness extreme. Modern experiments using uniform fields of light and sound can still produce visual patterns in healthy participants, but they also show why the original story needs care. Hallucinations produced by flicker differ from those produced by homogeneous input. Expectations, personality, anxiety, sleep, and the instructions given by researchers can all change what a participant notices and reports. In 1964, another team demonstrated the power of those expectations. They placed students in a room that was not truly deprived, surrounded them with medical-looking equipment, warned them about unusual experiences, and still produced some of the effects associated with sensory deprivation. The goggles and cuffs changed the sensory world, but the meaning of the experiment changed the people inside it too. That complication mattered because the McGill work was never only an abstract puzzle about vision. The original paper begins with radar operators, pilots, and anyone forced to watch a world in which almost nothing changes until one important signal appears. The work was funded by Canada's Defence Research Board during the early Cold War. A later government inquiry identified the contract as Project X-38 and described an interest in whether prolonged deprivation could make people more open to new beliefs. That history is real, but it is often retold carelessly. Hebb's students were paid volunteers who could leave. They were not the psychiatric patients later subjected to non-consensual experiments by Ewan Cameron in Montreal. The student study was not a secret CIA room disguised as a campus job. It was Canadian defense-funded research, whose findings later attracted people interested in interrogation, confinement, and persuasion. The unsettling result does not need embellishment. 22 healthy students entered a comfortable room, expecting easy money. Nothing attacked them. No drug was given. The room remained lighted, and a researcher was always nearby. Yet for some, thought became hard to organize. Time loosened, and an empty visual field filled itself with patterns, objects, and scenes. The experiment did not prove that silence is dangerous, that solitude causes psychosis, or that a short flotation session will make someone hallucinate. It showed something narrower and stranger. A stable mind depends partly on stable contact with a changing world. The room did not add a fantasy to a passive camera. It removed enough new evidence to expose that the camera had never been passive. Perception is a bargain between what reaches you and what your brain brings to meet it. In the McGill cubicle, one side of that bargain became almost silent. The other side kept talking.